Mahalo, Frank, and mahalo for the wonderful introduction. Usually it's just a one-name thing. Oh, here's Danny. So that's, thank you so much. It's nice to be here with all of you this afternoon, and after a great lunch, and our stomachs are ma'ana, are filled, and just hope I don't put anybody to sleep after a good meal. But I want to begin my story, my mo'olelo, in a very, very traditional manner. And when I have the opportunity to travel out of Hawaii, and on occasions when I traveled with our marketing and sales people at Maunalani, I would always make my introductions in this traditional manner. And I would tell the people that we visit up there that, I'm going to introduce you to my workplace, the aina where I work at, and I spent a big part of my life at, with an oli, with a chant. And I would ask them to just close their eyes and to just imagine themselves just floating on the trade winds and traveling to our fair islands of Hawaii. And so I'm going to begin my talk in that way. And this oli that I'm going to share speaks about the mountains that surround us. And as you all know, we have the largest and tallest mountains on the face of the earth. Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea, we have Hualalai, we have the Koala Mountains. But we also have right across Alenuihaha Channel, Haleakala on the island of Maui. And so from where I stand, the fish ponds of Kalahuipua'a, on a clear day I can see all of these mountains. And for us, these mountains are very sacred. They're like pyramids. And so I've had the fortune of coming there many years ago, of going there many years ago to plant my seed, which is slowly growing and developing. But I'd like to share this chant with you. O alalei o haleakala pilino koala. He ai na aloha o na uiwi. Ai na ui kanui kaulau. E ola e na mamo. E ola e ole na no nai ti mai ana e ola e ka o Hawaii alohe. And so now I bring you all home to our islands of Hawaii. And so in sharing my story, I'm going to kind of take you back in time to my connection to this land, which is called Kalahuipua'a, where you find Maunalani Resort, the Maunalani Hotel, Bay and Bungalows. I've had the great fortune of although I'm born and raised on this island, grew up on Waikiki Beach, thought that I grew up, my biggest passion was to be a Waikiki Beach boy. As I saw all of the old timers, my uncle, Kahu Abraham Akaka, would take us nephews to Waikiki, taught us to surf, to paddle canoe. At the time, the Kahanamoku brothers there, Sammy Steamboat, a lot of the old timers are still around, and I thought, oh, that's what I want to be, a Waikiki Beach boy. Oh well, things have changed in my life, but I still work by the ocean. I'm kind of a beach boy up there at Kalahuipua. And so, my first acquaintance to that property, and I'm not sure if you know where Kalahuipua is, but just to give you an idea of where Kalahuipua is, Kalahuipua is in Ilikupono, which is a royal section of land within the Ahupua, the big Ahupua of Waimea, which is in the Moku, or the district of Kohala, on the Mokuokiawe, or the island of Hawaii. So that's where we are. And on a clear day, as I said, you can stand at the fish ponds and see 5 mountains which center us, and which I always call Kalahuipua the Pico of the Kuahivi, of the Mauna, of the mountains, the center or the navel of the mountains. And so it was in the early 70s, 1972, that I made my first connection with Kalahuipua, with one of our Hawaiian language teachers, Larry Kimura, whose family has for many generations worked Parker Ranch, and who still have family involved with the Parker Ranch even today. Some of us students stayed at their home in Waimea, but we also were taken down to those fish ponds. And I remember first going there, where we had to go through Puako, which at the time was a very small community and with mostly beach homes. Then we had to go through a gate at a place called Paniel, which is owned by the Ruddle family. And once we made that entrance, then we were able to go through one more gate to get to Kalahuipua. And I can tell you my first impression of that place growing up in Honolulu. I never thought that a place like that in Hawaii still existed. Of course, I haven't been to the other islands at that time in my life, but it was pure paradise for me. 7 fish ponds, spring-fed, mixed with salted water or salt water, surrounded by coconut trees and milo trees, native Hawaiian vegetation, mullet fish jumping in the ponds. And I went, at the time had pig pens over there, had old cottages built by the Parker Ranch and by Uncle Francis E. Brown. And just to be there, I kind of felt that I had stepped through a window of time, and seeing things that Kamehameha, Umi, great ali'i of Hawaii, all saw in their lifetime. And to be a part of that, and the evenings in which we shared stories and music and maybe a cold beverage or two. And the stories that came out at the time. And, I know today is Halloween, so I'm going to kind of share with you a very brief chicken skin story, which takes us back to those early days before development, and when you didn't dare walk out of the light, because beyond that was just pitch black. You would hear voices and you would kind of feel things around you. You never felt alone there. But the little cottage that we stayed at, that was built by Eva Parker and Frank Woods back in the 1920s, which is known as the Eva Parker Woods Cottage, which is my afternoon office, was built on an old Hawaiian trail, a Maukamakai trail. And in those days, we didn't know too much about the things that I do now. And the Kihei family, who were the guardians and keepers of Kalahuipua, they would, on certain nights, tell us, "Oh, tonight, you come stay this side. Don't stay in this house." You never question the kupuna, right? You always say, "Oh, okay." And everything in those days was done purely in Hawaiian. That was part of our classroom. The Kihei were an old Hawaiian couple with their grandchildren, and everything there was spoken in the Olelo Makuahine, in the Hawaiian language. And so we never questioned those things. And on years following, I would still return, and on certain nights, usually 2 nights a month, we were invited to stay at another cottage. And then later on, maybe 2 nights later, oh, okay, you can go back. Well, it wasn't until years later that somebody came up to me and said, hey, so I heard you folks stayed at that haunted house at Kalahuipua. I went, what haunted house? It was always good. No spirits or anything bothered us. And they said, oh, so you didn't hear about that huakaipo, about the night marchers, that spiritual procession that comes down certain times of the month, certain moons, and the Akua moon, which is the night before the full moon, or the Pokane, the 27th night of the lunar phase, which are normally the nights when this procession would travel the ancient trails to places that were sacred in those days. And although those stone walls or those heiau may not be there anymore, but spirits still travel to those areas. And I said, well, you know, we never had those experiences. And then I realized that we were spared that Mama and Papa Kihe didn't want us to go through that kind of experience, which can be kind of chicken skin and spooky. So they invited us to stay with them on those nights. So, you know, it wasn't until many years later that when I got married, we moved to the island of Hawaii. I worked at Aloha Airlines at the time. And eventually, well, after I got furloughed, went to work in that area of Kalahuipua. And looking at this, I went, you know, I remember that area, but I was really disoriented as construction went on. You know, I would walk around that area and kind of recalling those early days and the family that lived there. And, you know, once the hotel opened, I was fortunate enough to actually work there at the hotel. I worked in construction there, and because of my knowledge of that area, I worked there as a grounds maintenance person. Well, you know, one of the things that as a grounds maintenance person, I loved working that job because it was physical. You know, I didn't have to, I had my own acre to work on, and people kind of didn't bother me. The plants never complained. But one thing that happened during those early years at Mauna Lani is that guests from the hotel would come down to where I was working and ask me questions. They would say, you know, the concierge sent us down here because we had questions that they couldn't answer, and we wanted to know a little bit about this place. So as I was doing my daily work, trimming, fertilizing, mowing, people would gather and would talk. I would share with them what I knew about the area and some of the stories of the area. And it got to be to a point where I was kind of like a Pied Piper. People would follow me around, and I finally told them, you know, I'm power work. I finish work at 3 o'clock, and I have to punch out. But if you're interested, I'll meet you at the beach and pool desk, and I'll take you on my own time. And so it grew from that. You know, people heard about that. People would at 3:30 meet me at the pool desk, and I take them out from anywhere from an hour to 2.5 hours, telling them what I knew, the stories, answering their questions. And after a number of years, I think the hotel realized that this is a popular thing. And schools would even call the hotel and said, we understand you have a historian at the hotel. And I would say, maybe hysterian, not historian. And so I would have to change and take, you know, maybe an hour and a half, take the school children around, which I loved doing. But that was all on my own time. It was all on my own time. And so the hotel realized the value of that, and so created a position as a Hawaiian historian, which over the years I worked at, and 3 times a week would take people on tours. And that was only part of my job. I was under guest services, so there was the babysitting part and many other things, but that was my passion. And so when I go to the schools, on career days, I always like when kids come down because I can go up to the schools and talk about the history and the stories there, but it has a greater impact when they're down there in my office with no walls. And so in the career days, I tell them that, my job and my position now as Director of Cultural Affairs was not handed to me on a silver platter. It came by way of the pure love and joy and passion for what I grew up in, our Hawaiian culture, the music, the hula, storytelling, all of these things which greatly affected my life is what I bring with me every day as I go down to Maunalani. And over the past 31 years that I have been there and blessed to have been there, I've met many people, many travelers who have chosen Maunalani as their destination to stay, and some of them are still very dear friends today. Some of them have, in fact, loved that area so much that they decided to build a home there. And so now a number of them are homeowners. But, I've always felt that, and when we talk about bottom line and how a cultural experience would affect someone and bottom line bring tourism dollars, to our property and hopefully to all the islands, it's really, for me, it's easy. For me, I grew up in a very spiritual family, in a musical family, and whether it's doing an oli, whether sharing a story, whether sharing the history, or perhaps a song, maybe not a hula. I'm not a good hula dancer. I got 2 left feet. But my wife is a beautiful hula dancer. And when she's with me, then we'll do a song and a hula. But all of these things help to enhance one's experience. And, I try and pass this on to the future generations, to the kids, to, learn from their, listen, spend time with your kupuna, spend time with your families and try and learn what you can from them. If you ask them, I'm sure they will be happy to share the family stories, the family genealogy, perhaps family songs and chants, olis, because this knowledge that you have will help to enlighten somebody else's life. And so to share this, and if you have the love and the passion in sharing this with our visitors, including our locals, our kama'ainas, I always tell them, don't worry about the money part because it'll kick in. When people come to you, things will happen, will work out. And money will just be a byproduct of that. Do it for the love and the passion and with aloha. And I want to thank you all, for I know you had a choice of another, and I would have been there too. But thank you for coming to listen. And, later on, if there are any questions, I could stand up here all day and talk. But anyway, mahalo.
Thanks, Danny. Hi, everybody. I'm going to start with something unorthodox because Danny doesn't know this. And he knows so much, but I'm going to tell him something he doesn't know, which is that, I've been here about 10 years in Hawaii, and a little bit over 10 years, and some years back, when we started talking about how we can give more back to the community in which we've had the opportunity to prosper in for so very long, we only knew that we had a history before I came about that focused on arts and culture philanthropy. And those are such big, broad words, and what does that really mean? And we looked around and said, well, what's going on around us right now that we can learn from before we decide what we're going to do to grow and give more? And Patty Tam, who was our vice president for so many years, and who was the GM of Halakalani for 9 years, and for 7 years before that, the GM of Waikiki Park, our sister hotel across the street. If you, probably a lot of you know Patty, but anyway, Patty's a real groundbreaker and trendsetter, and she broke the glass ceiling years ago here, not only for, actually around the world for in 5-star hotels for female general managers. She was really the first one out here who did that as well. She's from here, she's Chinese American, and Patty is somebody who believes that nothing is impossible, and she's proved it and continues to do so. And Patty said to me one day when we were having those discussions, well, just check out what Danny's doing. So I said, who? I was new. And so I went out to the Big Island, and I decided I was going to see this guy and take a tour, but then he was on an ambassador trip culturally somewhere else, so of course my timing was off. But I looked around and I had the experience, you know, as you know, if you're in the hospitality business, you know, there are only two people you should really talk, you really need to talk to find out what's going on. It's the guests and the staff. And what I heard from both was so remarkable. And he just said it in his closing remarks so beautifully, which is that, you know, the money's important, you know, jobs, economy, tourism, and all of that, and that's one of the big questions today. But that actually, he pointed it out so well, it comes really easily in the end when you're just passionate and sincere about what you're doing, and if what you're doing is really authentic. So having said all that, you know, he's sort of been this sort of cultural mentor, for lack of a better word, for us from afar. And this is the first time we told him that. So thank you. Now, having said that, I will insist to you, we haven't stolen all his ideas. But we've been heavily influenced by many of them. So I've got a PowerPoint, but, you know, but I'll keep that brief because as someone once remarked to me, you know, so many wonderful ideas have been destroyed through PowerPoint. So yeah, I'll get to that, and if I forget, we'll either forget it or remind me. But you know, it's funny how things work because I continue, you know, through this mid to later part of my life to be, I consider myself extremely misunderstood. I just must be good at doing that with people. They either can't figure me out or they make a decision and they really, I leave saying they didn't really understand who I was with this. So as much as I don't want to talk about myself, and that's not why I'm here, I do want to say that I actually will back into this presentation by saying that I did not come to business through hotel school or originally through business school. I was a real black sheep. And again, I feel with Danny, I have so many, there's these threads of affinity that flow through the air. I'm from New York originally, a long ways away. I have worked in 30 some odd years in hotels all over the world. And before here, I was for 8 years in the Caribbean islands, all over the Caribbean for Rosewood hotels. But I started, I came from a family of people in the arts. My father was a film composer. My mother had been, well before I was born, sort of a Greenwich Village, New York bohemian of the 1940s. And she's around today at 88 and still, you know, giving me directives indirectly for Halakalani. Although she's never been here, but she knows better, of course. And I think she does. So, you know, I came from that background, and eventually, and I stumbled into food and beverage in New York years ago, and a friend of mine said, work at a hotel, they have better benefits, you know. So I did that. I was a bartender, paying my way through art school, music and arts. And then I was working in a hotel, and I thought, wow, it's so wonderful how these people come back. It's like their home, and what is this? I've never stayed in a great hotel, you know, and I was trying to figure it all out. So, you know, all these years later, I end up here, and I kind of work my way in just through working hard and trying to really listen to people. And I was able to this day to take my understanding of the arts and culture, which was really my background, as well as education, and really apply that to a place of hospitality. Because when I eventually got to be a hotel manager 25 years ago, the first time, I looked around and I thought, I went to a marketing meeting and I said, these guys think that's creative? I said, try writing a sonata, try writing a song, try writing a poem that has real substance. That's really tough. But if you really let it flow, good things will happen. So, I get to Halekulani and I find out that 10 years ago, the parent company, Mitsui in Japan, which seems like this big faceless corporate Japanese, giant of a public corporation, actually has this incredible family history, the Mitsui family, going back to 1652 when they sold kimonos on the street in Nihonbashi. And over the years, they became so successful. And before art was called art, they were, it's like here, there were these cultural treasures, a piece of pottery, a piece of fabric. They collected these things because they thought they were beautiful. And 6 years ago, they didn't know what to do with them, and they built a little museum in Tokyo. It's not a big one, but it's very beautiful. It's called Mitsui Museum. And so when I came here, they said to me, one thing, you've got to work with arts and culture. And so I said, oh, okay, I understand. And then when they left, I said, oh, thank God, this is going to be much more fun than I thought it would be. Okay. So since then, we've tried to do a lot and grow in the community. Now, somebody told me a while ago at another conference in Europe, that no corporation can be 100% altruistic and selfless in their contributions philanthropically. It's impossible. You guys are trying to leverage your brand. So I'm not so sure, though, if leveraging a brand, if spreading the word about a brand is a bad thing, if it's a brand that does good things. So it's a win-win-win. I decided a while ago to try and figure out, Lures Street that leads to Halekulani. Robert Lures, who was there in the late 1890s, young guy in his 20s, was a carpenter, started a carpentry business, made a lot of money, built Lures House where Gray's House by the Sea was. You know this better than I do. And there it was, and the great legend of the hospitality that started there was because the fishermen locally periodically couldn't get back up the coast, and it was getting dark out at certain times of the year, and they had this great boatload of fish, and that they came up and said, well, can we stay overnight here? Do you have a roof we can put over our heads? And he said, well, what do you have in the boat? And they said, fish. And he took one look and said, well, I'll have my chef cook the fish, and let's all have dinner together. You can stay over. That's the deal. And from there, there's this belief with a lot of our employees that that's where that whole mon of hospitality really came from in that place. I think it goes much further back to the time that the royals and the families were enjoying the beauty of Waikiki well before any of us ever arrived. But anyway, I decided recently to find out more about Robert Lures. So the long story short is I go online and I start Googling this guy and everything else, and I ended up on Google Earth an hour later and found out that he came here in 1856, I think it was, and from New York, and I zoomed in on his house on Google Earth, and there's this building, and I said, I know that building, that's on Broome Street, right? And I realized it was 2 blocks from where I grew up in New York City. So I thought, wow, we both came from Broome Street in New York City. This is a really strange phenomenon. But then I thought, I really seriously felt even more so, it's weird how life works, right? I have some sort of a responsibility. Nothing happens by accident. And here's this weird thing, and now I'm sitting here, and what do you do to try and contribute to culture and contribute to the legacy of the institution itself? So we started partnering, and that's where okay, really quickly, there we are. Sorry. There's his house. And we've gone on from them to say, we recognize we've got a legacy. It's a very precious culture that we find ourselves immersed in. Quality is very important because it attracts people of all places and kinds. Service, there's this incredible legacy of service at Halekulani. That's a shot right at the beginning of the war there with Mr. Kimball in his bathrobe talking to staff. I don't dress that way at work. And then we started getting involved, and when I came, we sponsored the symphony. And since then, we've really expanded that. We're with the new symphony now. We've started with the opera. We've just joined Hawaii Theater. Bishop Museum as well, we're a major sponsor. The Honolulu Academy of Arts, which is now the Honolulu Museum of Art, as well as Spalding House, which was the Contemporary Museum. University of Hawaii College of Arts and Humanities. We're very, very involved with them in ways that I don't have time to talk about today. We're one of the main sponsors for decades of the Iolani Palace. And we're the title sponsor, which started last night. Get your tickets, if you didn't already, for the Hawaii International Film Festival. And that's really been fun and exciting for us. So we keep growing, and these are some additional sponsors, and I won't even take the time to talk about it. But these are partners. But what we found is that if we get out into the community, and Danny touched on it, he picked a better word than I could. He said, I think he said enlightening people. The deep, the riches of Hawaii are so endless. And we also use the words exposure and enhancement. So when we really start talking about how this can translate into tourism dollars, you know, I never would want to compare destinations, but again, I spent almost as many years in the Caribbean islands, and I worked in 26 different countries in the Caribbean. And I can tell you that it's a wonderful culture as well in its own way there. There are 26 different main cultures. But because of the fact, historically, it's mainly based from a slave culture there, there's a real quagmire there as far as cultural celebration, because a lot of people are not sure where their original roots really lay. They don't know. So it's a different type of environment in that way, but within that are these incredible subcultures have developed from their own influences and heritage. So what I found in Hawaii is that the more you keep digging into the quality of arts and culture and heritage here, you just realize there's no bottom. Because it's about the spirit and the soul of the people and the culture, and if we can just tap on that and give a contribution back to the community again, great things happen. So just in conclusion, you know, if for example with the museum, and I don't want to pick on the museum, they're one of our best partners, but an observation to be perfectly candid with you is this. If they come to us and they say we're going to do a huge exhibition next year and it's going to be impressionist artists from France or whatever the case may be, and that's a really nice thing to do and everything else, and if we decide we have the resources to sponsor that exhibition and it's good for the public, we can do that. But that's not that hard, honestly, given the resources. What's really hard is to get to one kid living here locally and enrich them culturally and spiritually. And so if you get a kid up to the Bishop Museum, we can do something that gets a kid up there. If we can do something that gets a kid to the opera, that gets a kid to the ballet, to do dance, whatever the case may be, that's when we really, really feel there's a really sweet return and that everything's really, really worth it. And what happens is there is a return because guests come in and they talk to the staff, and the staff member says proudly, my hotel does this, and if you stay here, here's 2 tickets to the symphony, front row tonight. That's a really extraordinary thing. Or simply, I'm a receptionist, let me walk you down to the beach and show you the Kiawe tree and tell you the 120-year history. That's why they come back. They don't come back because it's not about beaches and bikini and nightclubs and even restaurants sometimes, unless it's a culturally relevant restaurant. It's really, in the end, about an authentic emotional experience that when the person gets back on the plane and leaves, he goes back and he's your ambassador in mind, because he goes back and says, I just got back from Hawaii. You will not believe the people, the music, the culture, the arts, the beauty, the nature, the spirit, the spirituality, and I just had an incredible trip that was beyond my expectations. And then it's really easy. So in the end, in a word, I think what we're both doing the same thing in one way is that we're celebrating what's already here, and we're sharing it with who wasn't until they came for the first time. That's our general spirit. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Danny. We have a microphone, and we have a whole room full of people who I suspect may have some questions. Joe Bruckup.
I have spent many, first of all, aloha Danny. His dad was my choir master when I was in the 7th grade. That took me to the Dinah Shore show to celebrate statehood. Yes, I'm old fut. Anyway, that being said, can you delete that last word? Okay.
I think it just went viral.
Just say old cuckoo. Many, many enjoyable nights at Haliku. You have brought, when the new Halikulani was built, not until that lovely lady, the GM, who was my sister's classmate, took reign, did I step foot. I thought it was too grandiose, to tell you the truth. I have since spent many memorable nights there at House Without a Key with Pa'ana. You are responsible for part of Waikiki that is not only historic, but it holds some very treasured parts of old Hawaii. In front there is a healing spot, Kawehewehe. And the fact that you bring Hawaii through, say, people like Pa'ana and the hula and the stories that go along with it, it continues that tradition that many of us used to experience in the old Haliku. And so that I say mahalo nui. And you're very right. If you bring all of that to the people that even are visiting for the very first time, they will remember not only that, but they will also remember all of our past, people that we're talking about, that made that ambiance that you are now bringing forth a reality without even trying, because they had a spirit, a giving spirit that people like Danny and now like you and Kelly over there are doing for Waikiki, and I'm so happy. And even though you're on the big island, Danny, Waikiki is still in your heart, I know that. But I just had to come up and say mahalo nui, because that's really important to people like me that have the time now to be able to sit and enjoy the music and the hula.
Thank you, Joe.
Aloha.
And if I can make one comment to what Brother Joe, you know, he is, and always considered him one of Hawaii's premier vocalists and singers. And, you know, if you ever listen to a song that he recorded, Walk With Me, Talk With Me, Waikiki, ooh, that's one of my favorite renditions. So, mahalo, Joe.
Question? So I hand over there before. John?
This is getting to be a habit. If Joe steps up, I'll step up. And I'll actually kind of reframe a question I asked earlier in another seminar. You guys, as Frank says, get it. We're concerned that the industry as a whole doesn't always get it. And I'm curious why. It's not entirely because they're greedy or don't understand everything. There must be some basic issues that you run up against, and I'm curious from the industry viewpoint what those are.
I'll go first. I'll be brief, but tell you that it's no secret that I'm kind of, Frank will tell you, I'm kind of a black sheep in the periodic hotel owners roundtable meetings in the Waikiki area. One simple example for me would be in Waikiki, and Danny used authentic. You know, there's real and there's commercial culture, and I think the worst thing that we can do is put something forth that is sacred and was beautiful, and then spin it and put veneer on it for the general public. The public around the world also is not stupid, and as it was hinted at earlier, Cultural tourists, you know, these people are switched on and they're looking, that's their buzzword, as the keynote speaker said earlier. So, for example, we've looked at things like the parades in Waikiki, and it's politically incorrect for me to sit here and say it, but I'll say it because somebody has to say it, is that they're parades and they're parades. And if there's a parade celebrating aspects of culture, that can be a wonderful thing for the tourists and the people here alike. If there's a parade sponsored by a commercial corporation that is not even based or investing in this area and then comes in with a product and for strictly profit and marketing purposes holds an event that is the natural flow not only of commerce but social life, even in Waikiki, because there are tens of thousands of people who live there as well, many of whom are from here originally, then that's something that should be really re-examined, because it's like, it's sort of, what's the word? It's like design creep. You know the expression, something happens really gradually over time, and it's a little bit more each year, and then you look 10 or 20 years later and you say, what happened to my street? What happened to my town? And I have a concern for that. And it's something that we don't have a solution for, but that we do speak up. So I think the answer is we've got to be having these conversations, and I think that's why this kind of a conference is really important, because look, it comes up now. It comes up. It would come up if this room was empty today. And what's important is that we're talking about it and looking for solutions that are good for everybody. So again, I couldn't give you a good solution, but that's an example of a problem as we see.
Mahalo, Peter. I can tell you a couple of things from the work that I do and my observances. You know, is that every property has a story. Every property has history. You know, I started doing this. My first tours are back in 1985, and you know, I don't know how many hotels at the time even had tours like that. But I always felt that every place has a story, and that every place should have a storyteller, a historian, a culture director, someone who can tell the stories of the area, because that's what people come for. They want to hear about, I mean, they want to come for the sun and all the beach and all those things, but I've met many people who also want to come for the culture and the history. Even more now over the years, it has grown. You know, the other thing, and I know this from spending time with a lot of kupuna, is the place names. You know, a lot of these names are either being shortened or changed. You know, like, for example, Anaiho'omalu, they call it Abe. And in time when we're gone, people will forget the story, and in the name is the mana. You know, the Hawaiians attribute the success of a place or even a person with their name. So that was the other thing, that to keep these names alive, and that could be done through a historian, through a storyteller, a cultural person, to share these stories, to keep names of people and places alive, and therein will lie your success.
Aloha. My name is Lori Sablas, and I'm here as the chairman of the Hawaii Pacific Parks Association. How many of you in this room have heard of Hawaii Pacific Parks Association? Very, very few. That's why I'm here. My mission is to really get the word out, but I really wanted to comment on this session. I just recently retired as the director of the Po'okela program at the Ka'anapali Beach Hotel. Now, in 1990, under support of the late Dr. George Kana, with Mike and Kenny Brown, we started the Po'okela program. And this is a good case study for those of you who are not aware of it, because back then they had the vision of educating all the employees, and it was mandatory that every employee goes to 4-hour classes every quarter. And we've been doing that since 1990. And the point is that you need to have leaders who have this long-term vision, who are able to commit, because in my view, we've talked about it again, it's about the people, it's about the place, it's the people who know the story, and how best but your employees who are there. And I think leaders should be more aware that their resource is right there, at their own properties if they only reach out. Danny is a good example of what he was in a yardsman, and now they have done it. Another example is Clifford Naioli, who was at one time the operator, PBX operator at PBX. And look at the knowledge that he has now brought to the hotel. He has also been an ambassador, traveling. So there are so many good examples that we have these resources in all of Hawaii, but we need to look to the source. We need to look to the people from the area. And those people who come from the mainland, while I respect that, more and more I'm seeing that they are recognizing the importance. Because I started my career way back then, you know, like he said about oh, well, I in that generation too. But you know what I've learned is because when I started, there were the mainlanders who came and said, I'm going to teach you about ho'okipa and hospitality. And I thought, shouldn't the role be reversed? Shouldn't we be the ones from this area? Shouldn't you learn from us? And so it took all these years, 50 years. Finally, people are getting it. And to give you an idea of case studies, I can tell you as an example, you know, the Ka'anapali Beach Hotel is one. The owner, Shaw, they don't have any other hotels. So we don't have the marketing dollars or strength of the competitors. What we've done well is for the employees because they're the best ambassadors. I'll give you a really quick example of case study is we have an employee there who has a knack of remembering every visitor who walks through the door. She'll remember them, meet them for the first time. When they come back, she'll greet, and how's your mo'opuna, and la 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 la. So I'm in the lobby, I retired, but I can remember a guest telling me, Laurie, I need to tell you about Malahini. I came here 10 years ago for my token visit to Hawaii. And I came to this hotel and I met Malahini. And long story short, this is my 10th straight return trip. I came as two, now I'm here with 20 people and we're staying our entire vacation at this hotel. Bottom line, that kind of thing, it works. But I go back, it's the people. So all the leaders here, look at your own area and recognize those individuals, give them the opportunity to be themselves and we'll be better. But we need to have the leaders from the top because they're the one got to say yes. Anyway, that's my manha'o.
Thank you, Laurie.
If I could also tag to what Laurie said, and she brought up names of, you know, visionaries in Hawaii. Kenny Brown, who just celebrated he passed away, but he just celebrated his birthday a few days ago. Dr. George Kanahele. You know, we were all together, you know, started out at Mauna Lani, and Mike White took that program, which we call Kuli'e Kanu'u, and Po'okela, which is a wonderful example of, you know, when you take that program and you incorporate the employees, you know, they are the best ambassadors. You know, and thank you for bringing that up, Laurie. Mahalo.
I can't resist jumping in with a question of my own. I think you guys are incredibly good, but also incredibly lucky to be working in organizations that let you be the black sheep and let you do what you do. When I talk to people in the industry, there's this sense of loss that now that we have 8.5 million visitors, we can't do what we used to do. We used to have $1-a-year entertainers and for Aloha Airlines and some other people, so that sales events were really kind of kapila, and it was all authentic. But that's when we had 2 million visitors or 2.5 million visitors. We had owners and operators here in Hawaii that were based here, and now we have investment companies that are managing hotels. So the question is there a way with 8.5 million visitors and with the changing character that we can get back some degree of where we used to be?
Geez, Frank. Okay. Wow. Okay, I'll take a stab at that. It's so important and it's so difficult to address. But maybe the answer is simple as well, and maybe a couple of your earlier comments from the audience speak to this in a way. You know, a couple of the resounding themes that I've been hearing, you know, talk about culture, and they talk about the people, and they talk about authenticity, and I think that I mentioned earlier a word that doesn't originally when I say commercial, but I think that when I talk to somebody who has stayed here, you mentioned Lord, you know, somebody coming back because somebody remembers their name when they arrive at that hotel. That's a reason they'll come back the next year. And when they feel that, it's not just because she thought the girl in the lobby is talented. She's probably making a correct assumption to the extent that the place that girl comes from speaks to that type of attentiveness and sincerity. You know, when people in our industry start using the word aloha, you know, the aloha spirit for tourism, you know, I have mixed feelings because it's absolutely right, but then so many businesses use it as a commercial leverage, and that's a real problem. We had a very famous person stay at our biggest suite about 5 years ago, and the day he checked in, there was a boy at the desk. He was 20 years old. He was new. He'd been working for 4 hours his first day, and he was a receptionist, and he was a nervous wreck. And the first guy to walk in and check in was this, I'll just say he was a tech industry giant. And he checked in, and this kid took him to the room and did his whole escort thing the way we trained him, the hotel company trains him, and he got him to the room, and then he got him into the big suite, okay, and he went, whew, that, and now my shift's over, I'm gonna go see my friends and celebrate. So, but then he had another idea, and nobody knew this was happening. He went back to his auntie's house, where she has a mango tree, and the tradition, his family for generations, was to take these mangoes when they were in season and bring one to someone's home, you know, as a gesture of warmth and love and hospitality. And he took it upon him to get a mango, and he looked around, he picked the best mango, and he drove back to the hotel, parked in our garage, and he went back up to the room with the mango, and he knocked on the celebrity's door, who opened the door and said, what is this? And he said, it's a mango. And he said, yeah. And he explained why he got this and how he got that from that tree. So, and he took it and said, okay, thanks, you know, and he closed the door. Well, about 2 months later, he rebooks and he comes back to the hotel. And I get a phone call saying, you know, what's with this place this time? I had the greatest stay here. I've been recommending people all over the United States and Europe to come here, and it just isn't the same time. And I said, well, what went wrong? And he said, well, the first time I was here, he said, this kid checked me, and he's from Oahu, and he's from Manoa, and he said he brought me a mango. And he said, where's my mango? Where's the kid? You know? So I thought, you know, they didn't teach that in hotel school, you know? So, yeah, I go, what do we learn from that? And it keeps coming back to this word about authenticity in an incredibly tech-drowning world that's nothing but plasticity, commercial messages, social media. Everything is spun. Everything's coming, you know, from some. Everything's adulterated. Nothing's pure. The mango's right off the tree, right from the branch. The juice is still running through from the branch. And I think that's what people. It can sound cute for me to say, because I'm going to go back and I'm going to sit in a corporate building in an office. So I understand if somebody is circumspect about my comment, but I guess my answer is, you know, we still have a chance to really celebrate what's really pure and beautiful here. And if we see an initiative by business or government that's going on that we think flies in the face of the authenticity and preservation of the culture, then as business leaders, to use, what can business leaders do? What we can do is say something. And the worst that happens is somebody in the next office or company or the government doesn't want to hear it. Too bad. Because I've learned after 30 years of work that I found if I don't find myself surrounded in a little bit of controversy at work, I'm not making any contribution, you know. Otherwise, I'm just sitting in my comfort zone. So we fail every day with some of these efforts and initiatives, but we try, and we got so many influential people in the room and at the conference that if every one of us just even once a week says or points out one thing and tries to take a step to fix it, then we really have a really powerful force that can protect the culture. So, thanks.
Absolutely well said. And one of the takeaways I have from this session and this conference is there's a lot they don't teach at hotel school. So we have another session coming up, which is sort of a debrief. And where do we go from here? This is the first, we hope, annual conference. And the next session is really meant to say, what can we do with the knowledge that we gained today? I think we may have time for one quick additional question. If not, we'll, go grab a mic. And while she's coming up, I will remind you that there's a survey that's going to come to you by email, and there are some fabulous prizes for lucky people who respond.
So did you promote the kid or did you demote him?
That was a quick question.
You want the real answer on that one? He went into another industry. He took one look at us and figured, this is crazy. I've got to do something substance, you know. No, he went. A really talented, sharp guy went back to school, paid his own way through college, and actually went into a tech career, and is doing really, really well for himself. So, and actually, the guy he was serving in the school would hire him if he was smart.
Thank you all for attending the session. The next session, debrief, and it's over where we had lunch.